In this video, we're going to go over the terminology that is particularly important for understanding what's happening with the World Wide Web and the internet. So think of this like a video glossary or video dictionary. And then after this, we're also going to, in the second half of this video, we're going to talk about some of what I refer to as the tools of the trade that will help you actually use and program and create items for the World Wide Web. The first term should be one that you've heard very frequently, and it is simply a web page. But to define a web page is to understand that it is just a specifically formatted document that can be interpreted by a web browser. Now, this is a very broad statement, but it means that it can be specifically formatted, meaning it uses something like HTML, which we will talk about, JavaScript, CSS, PHP. All of these are different coding languages that browsers are able to interpret and render images, text, links, and other interactive elements that we have all come to know and use. But think about it as just a single document or file. A website, on the other hand, is a group of related web pages. So now you have a web page that has links to other web pages, and that collection is what forms a website. So what these really are is a collection of documents that all exist together and are interconnected and interlinked to make them into one cohesive website. A home page is the primary page of a website. Again, this should be something that you're probably familiar with, and it typically provides, at the very least, the information about the website's purpose and an introduction to the content that you're going to find within the rest of that website. Some standard elements that tend to appear on most home pages is a logo or a word mark, such as the example that's shown here, the UW Stout logo, a navigation menu, or in this case, several navigation menus, a search box, and this is particularly true if this is what is referred to as a dynamic website. And we're not going to be getting into dynamic websites in this particular course because that requires connectivity to databases, and we're not going to be doing that. But it is still a common feature. And of course, the other thing is links, which is a combination of elements, because you can think of your navigation or menu bar is a collection of links. But there are other items, for example, on this page that I'm showing you, under upcoming events or latest news, that are just links. And that is the part that connects to the other documents or files that make up a website. Now, a web browser is something we are all familiar with. They come in all shapes and sizes, but at the basic core description, it is a software application that is able to request information from a web server that exists someplace else, downloads that information from that server, sends it back to your computer, it renders it and displays it as a web page. So it takes your request, and we're going to get into this in the last video, your request when you send in a www.uwstout.edu, it's going to go out to the web server, it's going to look for a particular file, and then it's going to do what's called, it's going to render that code to present it in the graphic layout and look that you're used to seeing. And web browsers, you're familiar, there's Firefox, there's Chrome, which is probably the most popular browser right now. There was Internet Explorer, which is transitioning over into the Microsoft Edge, Safari on the Macs, but there are countless others, including ones with names like Vivaldi, Opera. So how do we actually start to think about accessing stuff through this browser? Well, first we have to understand the difference between the terms ISP and IP. These are terms that are going to get thrown around a lot, and it's important to understand the difference. An ISP is short for the Internet Service provider. So the word service is the important word here because it says that this is a service that's being provided. So what this is a company that provides that internet service to individuals and organizations. Think Charter, Comcast, local telephone communication companies, Mediacom. These are all examples of internet service providers. They are the ones that enable you to connect to the internet. The other term is the IP. This is the Internet Protocol. Internet Protocol, and we're going to get to this in the third video as well, it's a numeric address for a computer that's connected to the internet. Think about this like your house and street address or an apartment number, that when you're mailing something, like physically mailing something, having something delivered to you, you need to provide that address. Well, that's what this is. So in this video, I've provided an example of 24.49.127.177. This is a common internet protocol or IP address, as it's commonly referred to. Beneath that, I've provided a URL, which is another name for a web address, called IP Chicken. If you want to find, I know it's a funny name, but if you want to learn what the IP address of where you currently are when you're using your computer, you can go out to ipchicken.com and it will tell you what your IP address or that numeric number is of your location on the internet. Next up is what I refer to as the tools of the trade, meaning what are the things that we use to create web pages and websites and connect them to the internet. The first is referred to as hypertext markup language. This is more commonly heard as HTML. Because it's a markup language, what it means is that it is written in a fairly plain language. It's designed for processing and defining the presentation of text. Later, the next definition we'll see is getting into CSS, or cascading style sheets, and that's what does the pretty stuff. HTML, on the other hand, is what gives us the structure and the initial formatting of the text that we use on the site. It specifies codes for formatting both the layout and the style within a text file, and it uses what's referred to as descriptive markup, meaning it is in somewhat plain language. For example, if you want to use a paragraph, it's a P. If you want to make something large, like a heading that's at the top of a page, the largest heading is called an H1, which is short for heading 1, or a slightly smaller heading, which is H2, and so on and so forth. So they try to make it fairly plain language. And the code used, specified the formatting, are called tags, and those are the little things between the angled brackets, and we're going to be learning a lot more about those. This is an example of what HTML looks like. So you can see here, we have something that's called the head, and we're going to get more into this. So we see an H1, which is our heading 1, and a UL, which stands for an unordered list. So think like a bullet point. And LI, which stands for list items. So they try to keep things pretty plain language. I don't expect you to remember all of these right now. I'm just trying to point out some examples of what the HTML, the hypertext markup language, looks like. In the next part of that goes along with HTML, we have what's referred to as cascading style sheets. We're going to get a lot more into what the cascade part means in later class periods, but for right now, think about a style sheet as the part that's actually adding the format of a document to the HTML. It's giving it the look, so it's giving it the color, it's giving it the thickness of the font, it's giving images borders, it's defining background colors, these sorts of things. So it's often commonly just referred to as styling a web page. And this is an example of what CSS, or cascading style sheets, look like. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but in simple terms, it's saying the body, which is the stuff we see on the site, that you're going to use this type of font, and it's going to be in this size, and it's going to be in this color. One of the other key elements that we need, this is truly a tool of the trade, is we need an editor. We need something that can write this code. Fortunately, there's a number of options. The first and most simple is just a text editor. And almost every computer out there comes with a text editor pre-installed. If you're using a Macintosh, it's just TextEdit. If you're using Windows, it's Notepad. This is really all you need to code HTML. To be a little more advanced, which gets into some of the color coding pieces, are what are referred to as HTML editors, and they color code certain elements of code so that they're easier to find and to identify errors and mistakes along the way. And a couple of examples of that are BBEdit, which stands for Bare Bones Edit, and Text Wrangler. The third is one of the most common, and it is what is referred to as a WYSIWYG editor, which stands for What You See is What You Get. And that adds more graphical interface, making it easier for people to see what they are doing. We will be using Dreamweaver in class as the preferred WYSIWYG editor. And what this adds to it is it gives us a design view as well as the code view. So you can actually see what's happening as you're coding. It gives you many prompts. It fills in the closing tags, and we'll get into that every code in HTML has an opening and closing tag. And another option is Aptana, which is a free application that does much the same thing as Dreamweaver. And fourth and finally, there's what's referred to as content management systems. And really what these are very complex pieces of software or applications that can be customized to shape almost any sort of website. Some of the common ones are WordPress, Joomla, and Drupal. And what they do is once a web developer puts together the site, they make it easy for non-technical people to actually input information into forms to create new pages on their websites. And that's it for the tools of the trade. In the next video, we're going to go into how web systems actually work.